Good evening, everyone. This is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about the movie Heaven's Gate on Blu-ray. Heaven's Gate came out in 1980 and was written and directed by Michael Cimino. The movie was a deconstructionist western that unfortunately has gone on to become regarded as one of the most notorious bombs in film history. So before I get into that, let me give you some background to give you all some perspective. So Michael Cimino was someone who had a genuinely good start to his career. He actually started off in the realm of screenwriting, wherein he co-wrote the screenplay for the environmental science fiction film Silent Running, and he also did a rewrite for John Milius' screenplay for the Dirty Harry sequel Magnum Force. It was on the strength of that work wherein Cimino was able to strike up a friendship with Clint Eastwood, and at this point in time, Cimino was working on a screenplay for what would end up being the movie Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. And when that screenplay found its way to Clint Eastwood, Clint Eastwood enjoyed it so much that he not only agreed to star in the movie, but he also offered Michael Cimino his chance to direct for the first time. And so, making his directorial debut, Cimino had a hit on his hands. It was a modest hit at the box office. Critics liked it, audiences liked it, and it also earned a young Jeff Bridges his second Academy Award nomination, in this case in the category of Best Supporting Actor. And it was kind of a combination of a good cast and Cimino being able to convey his vision to audiences, but also you had Clint Eastwood minding the store. So even though Cimino wrote and directed the movie, Clint Eastwood was basically the guy who was making sure that the movie came in on time and on budget. And he had this bit where he allowed for no more than 3 takes. Anytime Cimino wanted to do more than 3 takes, Clint Eastwood would be like, nope, we got it, let's keep going. And basically all that combined to, result in Thunderbolt and Lightfoot being, the hit that it was. And from there, Michael Cimino would go on to direct The Deer Hunter for a second movie. And The Deer Hunter, Cimino was something wherein Cimino had a lot more leeway as a director. But unfortunately, this kind of resulted in the movie going over budget and over schedule, but it also ended up being such a hit with critics and audiences and at the box office, and it earned 5 wins at the Academy Awards, amongst them being Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Supporting Actor, Christopher Walken. So The Deer Hunter put Michael Cimino on top of the world and established him as a cinematic auteur. And whatever work he did next, people wanted in on it. And so for his third film, Michael Cimino would write and direct Heaven's Gate. And Heaven's Gate was in turn a dramatization of a point in American history called the Johnson County War. And if I remember correctly, it took place in 1892, I believe. And so it was a conflict between the cattle barons and immigrant settlers, and it was a struggle for resources. A struggle for land, for water, food, cattle, and it got to such a point wherein the cattle barons tended to make things needlessly difficult for immigrants, and as a result, immigrants had to resort to underhanded means to feed their families, namely by stealing cattle. And so this would go back and forth, until the cattle barons would cross the line, by hiring mercenaries to hunt down and kill these immigrants. And there was actually some backing from the U.S. government as well. And so you basically had, a point in history that was one of the worst instances of white-on-white, racism. And so with that in mind, there was definitely a potent story, waiting to be told. And having finally seen Heaven's Gate, it definitely made me interested in, looking up, the actual story as far as, the Johnson County War and what really happened. But as a movie, though, I have to say, this is, a momentous movie. You feel like you're watching something important. And there's a reason that Heaven's Gate was re-released by the Criterion Collection. They put out and re-release important movies, films that had a lasting impact on cinema. And Heaven's Gate definitely had a lasting impact on cinema. But unfortunately, at watching the movie, you can see where on one hand there was so much to like about the movie, but there's also so much about the movie that you could see where some of the problems were, and the movie as a result ends up, at least in my opinion, not being the good movie it could have been. Like it's a decent movie, like it's worth watching, and if you're a fan of cinema, you should definitely check it out at least once in your life. But the thing is, Cimino was basically given so much leeway, and the studio head people were reluctant to say no to him because, hey, this is the guy who did The Deer Hunter. I mean, it's one of the best movies ever made, literally. So basically, anytime someone tried to tell him no on something, he would blow them off, and so the movie ended up, like, it was initially budgeted somewhere between, I think it was like 5 and 11 million, but because of various various expenditures and Michael Cimino's perfectionist nature, the budget ended up ballooning to somewhere between 44 and 50 million. Okay, and so that's a lot of money. And as several people told Cimino before the movie hit theaters, this movie had better be good, otherwise they are going to kill you. And so the movie ended up grossing somewhere between $2 and $4 million. So with a budget of somewhere between 44 and 50 million, yeah, this was a huge bomb. And it basically ruined Cimino's career as a director. And he did do some other movies, including at least one other good movie, which was Year of the Dragon, a crime drama that was written by Oliver Stone and starred Mickey Rourke and John Lone. And so that was at least one other worthwhile effort that Cimino was able to turn out. But beyond that, his work wasn't was. It never really met with the success that his films, like, say, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot or The Deer Hunter, had met with. And anytime Cimino would work on a film after Heaven's Gate, the studios were keeping an eye on him, and just because they didn't want another Heaven's Gate on their hands. And so it's basically a cautionary tale. It's like, for studio people to, have a decent enough, or tight enough rein on, their directors. Like, you want the directors to do the movie, you want them to give, people a good movie, but you also don't want them to, go insane with, wild spending or, unreasonable demands and things like that. And so, one of the other fallouts from Heaven's Gate being the bomb that it was that it was kind of like the end of an era, because up to this point, directors, like, starting, I believe it was like from the 70s, to 1980, directors were given a lot of creative freedom. People like Scorsese and Coppola, I mean, they were given a lot of leeway because, the studios knew that these guys, even if these movies, cost a lot, they're going to be good movies. And so, unfortunately, though, Cimino, like, while he was a part of this group, and even though he had only had 2 films, to his credit at this point, it was his 3rd film that basically not only ruined his career, but it also brought an end to that particular, movement. And so, basically from Heaven's Gate onward, the studios, ended up wielding more power than the directors. And so, and also it was one of the things that contributed to the decline of the Western in terms of, say, cinema. And so there's so many things that happened as a result of Heaven's Gate bombing at the box office. And it's like you read about some of the stuff that went on behind the scenes. I mean, it's morbidly fascinating. But having finally gotten to see the movie, I can appreciate it. It's a movie that I'm not going to say it's a good movie, but it's definitely something that I think if you're a film lover, you should see at least once in your life. Because on one hand, you have some wonderful camera work and some of the most beautiful cinematography I've ever seen. And the cinematographer was, or the director of photography was Vilmos Zsigmund, and if I remember correctly, he's the same guy who worked with Cimino on The Deer Hunter. But basically, you just have this film that looks fantastic, and the production values are top notch. Like the people who, the production team, like the people who did the sets and everything. This movie looks like something that was made that takes place in the 1890s, and the people who were involved with, like, say, costuming and props and what have you. It's like the costumes, especially every costume you see in the movie was apparently based on a real historical photograph. And so you watch the movie and you feel like you're in the 1890s. I mean, that's how good it is in terms of production values and atmosphere. So in that regards, I mean, I enjoyed Heaven's Gate immensely. And also, seeing kind of like one of the dark sides of American history. I mean, the aforementioned bit of white-on-white racism is something that you don't see addressed a lot these days. So seeing some of that, it was kind of like, whoa, kind of an eye-opener. And the climactic battle between, the mercenaries and the immigrant settlers, I have to say, is one of the most impressively, brutal, battle scenes I've seen in a movie. I mean, prior to CGI movies, like this is like 1980 old school, practical stuff. I mean, camera work, stunts, action, everything about the climactic battle was just like amazing and terrifying too. All that being said, though, I mean, I'm saying and also I should mention, the cast is wonderful. I mean, you have so many familiar faces. I mean, you have Christopher Walken, you have Kristofferson, Isabelle Huppert, Sam Sam Waterston, and from Law and Order, Brad Dourif, and I mean, so many familiar faces, like even in bit parts. Like you have Jeffrey Lewis, Mickey Rourke. I mean, so many other people that you're kind of like, if you have some familiarity with film, you're gonna see a lot of people that in this movie. So I'm singing the movie's praises, and rightfully so. Okay, but there is a but. This movie is 3 hours and 30 something minutes long, okay? If you're going to have a movie that long, you need characters that you can identify with, characters that you can get behind. You have to have protagonists that you can get invested in and root for. And this is, I think, the movie's biggest fault. Because while the cast is wonderful and the actors are good, the character development is very stunted and abrupt, in my opinion. Because here's the thing, you look at, say, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, the Deer Hunter. You had Cimino basically working with other people. I mean, with Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, while he wrote the screenplay, he had Clint Eastwood keeping an eye on things and basically challenging him to develop these characters. And so, and with the Deer Hunter, you actually had someone else doing the screenplay. Like when Cimino, he worked on the story, and so did several other people, but there was someone else that did the screenplay for that movie. And so you look at the Deer Hunter, and the character development is just wonderful. Okay, I mean, it's very believable, and you feel like you're watching real people. And so with Heaven's Gate, though, not only did Cimino write the screenplay, but he also had no one really minding the store. I mean, he was given free reign, and to do things however he saw fit. And so while he definitely was able to work with, the people making the movie to, give us, this beautiful looking, piece of cinema, he neglected to say give us characters that we care about. And so with that in mind, you have characters who are either are protagonists but who are very underdeveloped, or you have villains who are so cartoonishly evil that it's sort of at times undermines the message of the film, or the lesson that the film's trying to teach us about this dark side of American history. And so, considering that this movie is 3 hours and 30 something minutes long, that's a problem. I mean, the fact that we're with characters who in a lot of ways, or at least in my experience, I found myself not really caring about the characters. Like, I mean, I liked the actors playing the characters, and sure enough, I mean, each of the main characters has a moment or two to shine. But throughout the whole movie, though, it just felt like their character development was very, haphazard, and you know, it was difficult for me to get invested in them, with the exception of a couple of nice moments where they get to shine, but those moments are few and far between. So that's, I think, the thing that keeps the movie from being good. I think that, say, if Cimino had a similar approach, with this movie that he'd had with the Deer Hunter, or at the very least, if he'd had someone keeping an eye on him and saying, okay, here's what we need to do, or if he'd had someone, co-writing the screenplay with him, someone who had a better idea of character development, I think that Heaven's Gate could have been, if not a great movie, it would have definitely been a good movie. But as it is, it's a decent movie. A beautiful looking movie, a great looking movie. And, just, it's a cinematic experience for sure, but it's not the good movie it could have been. So, yeah, the story, I mean, it focuses on this character by the name of James Averill, as played by Kristofferson, and he graduates from Harvard in 1870. And he and his friend, let's see, guys, there's some people I gotta keep track of here. Billy Irvine, as played by John Hurt. The two of them are amongst hundreds of other graduates from Harvard in 1870, and basically Averill is inspired to go out and basically tame America, and basically help to bring civilization to this wild frontier. And so fast forward to around 1890 or so, Averill is coming to Wyoming to be a federal marshal, and basically ends up in a bit of a love triangle with a whorehouse madam named Ella, as played by Isabelle Huppert, and who's also being pursued by this gunfighter named Nate Champion, as played by Christopher Walken. And Nate Champion is actually working for the cattle barons, who are wanting to basically do away with the immigrants that are coming in, because of the fact that they're stealing some of their cattle at times, and also just for pure racism. And so Nate Champion, he's hunting down some of these immigrants, but he's also pursuing Ella, who herself is an immigrant. And so there's a bit of a conflict there, as far as I guess you could say a conflict of interests. And James Averill, of course, I mean, he's wanting to try and make a difference as far as help the immigrants to be able to make a life for themselves in America. But unfortunately, he's up against a system that is wanting to do anything but help these immigrants. And so when the time comes for the cattle barons to hire this large band of mercenaries, Averill is in a position where he can't really do much. I mean, as far as, say, like getting help from the government, I mean, that's kind of a joke, because the government at this point is on the cattle baron's side. And so with that in mind, I mean, James Averill, can only, watch in horror as, these forces encroach upon, the territory of where, this town where the immigrants are. And, and he's able to tell them, hey, there's this army of paid killers who are, coming to hunt you down and kill you. And so naturally, the immigrants, are terrified, because they're already having to contend with discrimination and violence as enough as it is. But now there's literally an army of people coming to kill them. And so, Ella, I mean, she's, caught between, Averill and Nate Champion, because, she's, I mean, her loyalties are, with her fellow immigrants, but at the same time, she loves both men, but both men have different agendas. And Nate Champion, on the other hand, while he's more inclined towards, say, the cattle barons, side, because, he's, a natural born American, he starts to, see that, maybe he's on the wrong side, because, I mean, he genuinely does love Ella. And since, Ella's on this death list, he's like, okay, I don't, I don't like, James Averill. I mean, he's my competition, but basically we're probably on the same side in this one. And so, what ends up happening is, I mean, after, this love triangle, you're seeing, like, this conspiracy, by these, cattle barons, aided by the U.S. government, come to fruition. And, and it results in this climactic battle between the immigrant settlers and the, army of mercenaries. And so, and the outcome is not pretty. I'll just leave it at that. So, Heaven's Gate. That was, that's the abridged version of, the story of the movie, as far as, like, the actual movie here. But I have to say, though, that I really enjoyed watching it finally. And I will say that if you do decide to try and take a shot at watching the movie, make sure you have a lot of time on your hands, because I ended up having to watch the movie across 2 nights, because it's like half of the movie on one night, half of the other, because it's a long movie, right? Um, but I really appreciated how much attention to detail there was in terms of, say, like the production design, and you know the amount of effort that went into recreating life and scenery and atmosphere from the 1890s. I mean, you really do feel like you're being transported somewhere. So it's like there are so many moments in this movie where you know I just found myself. I mean, it's like I know I'm watching a movie. I know there's a story going on, but look at the scenery here. I mean, look at these buildings, or look at these mountains. I mean, that's how beautiful a scenery is. It's kind of like you literally just find yourself, wanting certain moments to go on for longer, just because of how beautiful they are. And I think part of that could be because the people of the Criterion Collection, when they were working with Cimino to restore the movie, they cleared it up, to where it looks pristine. Because there's actually one of the special features on disc 2 is a couple of examples of how the process of restoration was used for this movie, and you see how the movie originally looked. It's it's almost grainy looking, which in some ways I guess could work in the movie's favor, but with the restoration, it looks a lot more refined and pristine, and it doesn't look artificial. Okay, because I know that there are some movie re-releases that are like Blu-ray or 4K or what HD or whatever, that the film quality is cleaned up to such a degree that, well, like the skin tones on certain characters look almost artificial, like it looks like shiny and plastic at times. So it's nothing like that. Like the people here, they did their best to release this movie in such a way to where you saw what Cimino and his people were wanting to give audiences. I mean, this epic world of this sort of this western that's a deconstructionist western that shows you like both the beauty of the Old West as well as the danger of the Old West and the dark side of the Old West. So I mean, you see the beauty of pure nature in this movie, but you also see how, while there's a certain beauty in the burgeoning civilization that's coming to America at the or that's gradually settling America. I mean, with all all the immigrants coming in, like you see these towns being filled with life and everything, and you hear all these people talking in different dialects. I mean, there's a certain beauty in this melting pot that you're seeing on hand, like, because even though the movie focuses on certain characters, there are also so many other people that show up that they're just like incidental characters, but because of how they're dressed, like with the wardrobe designs or costume designs, or like say you hear them talking in their native dialect and everything, and you really gain an appreciation for just how much effort went into conveying how much of a melting pot America was and still is. And so I definitely liked that about the movie. And there were instances wherein you saw just how difficult life was for immigrants coming over, and how, I mean, the white racism thing was a real thing. And because you saw people getting killed or getting the crap beat out of them because of racism and everything. And there were some moments that really showed the harsh reality of that. And there was even like a moment or two where I was just kind of moved. I mean, not to the point of tears necessarily, but just to the point of like it was just like you it caused you to pause, I guess you could say. Like there's a scene I remember where Kristofferson's character, James Averill, he's got this carriage, and he's going down the road. I mean, it's horse-drawn carriage, right? And he sees this woman and her family and these little children trying to push this huge cart on down the same road, and there's no horse. It's just this woman and her little children. And so he stops and goes to them, and he actually offers to help them, to try and give them a lift into town. And she declines, but what you find out is like her husband and the children's father was murdered by people who were working for the cattle barons, and because he was an immigrant. And you see his dead body on the cart, like you see a hole in his head, and this woman, and you could tell she's broken and everything, but she's also stubborn and determined to go to the land that she and her husband paid for, that they it's land that they bought, and it's theirs by right, and she's wanting to make sure that her children have a place to call their own, but you just see this woman just worn down and broken by it all, but still trying to do right by her children. And you see the children who are just they're like probably younger than 10 years old, and they're already being exposed to all this stuff, and but they're doing the only thing they can do, and they're little kids who are trying to help their mom and push the carriage, and their dad's literally in the carriage or on top of the carriage dead, and they're having to deal with that. And so there are some hard-hitting moments like that manage to stand out, and it's like little moments like that kind of got to me. And so this is where I think we get to where the aforementioned problem of the character development comes into play, because you have some powerful, quietly powerful moments like that, but unfortunately the majority of the movie is focusing on the characters of James Averill, Nate Champion, and Ella, and the love triangle between the three of them. And not to say that there aren't moments where those characters don't, I'm not trying to say that the characters don't work at all, because they each one of them gets a moment to shine. Like maybe there's a certain line of dialogue they have, or maybe there's an unexpected bit of pathos or humor that they have. But for the most part, though, the chemistry between the three of them, it's almost non-existent. Like on their own, each character on their own, I think does a good job, but the fact that there's supposed to be this love triangle between the three of them, that's what brings the movie down. Because I mean the actors playing them are good, but it's just that I really think that if, say, someone had actually worked with Michael Cimino to refine the screenplay in terms of, say, developing the characters, I think we could have had something good here, because we're supposed to be caring about these characters. We're supposed to be caring about Averill and Champion and Ella, but it's just that it's like you'll have these scenes of the three of them or of Ella with Nate Champion or Ella with Averill, and it's kind of like, because of the lack of chemistry between them, I mean there's some wild physical fun and everything, but just in terms of, say, on an interpersonal level, the chemistry doesn't really feel authentic, at least in my opinion. Like, you could definitely tell they're having a good time when it comes to, say, like the bow chicka bow bow stuff, but when it comes to, say, beyond that, though, there's really nothing that stands out as far as saying, hey, these are people that, that one can get invested in. It's not that kind of, vibe, I guess you could say. But and I think it's just because of that, though. I guess the reason it's such a problem is that we're with these characters for the majority of the movie, and I mean, and the thing is, I mean, you have other characters in here that manage to stand out. I mean, you have Jeff Bridges. I mean, he's in here too. He plays a guy named John L. Bridges, who, if I remember correctly, is actually supposed to be his real life ancestor, right? But he shows up and he's actually pretty good in the movie. Like, I mean, he has the same type of likable charisma that he had in Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. And you also have Brad Douriff, who is kind of like like, I guess you could say, a representative of the immigrants. Like, he's the one who tries to make their concerns known and what have you. And of course, seeing Brad Dourif, in a role that isn't like a psychopath or a killer, is always good to see, because Brad Dourif is a good actor, but he just tends to get typecast, unfortunately. And John Hurt, I mean, it was really cool seeing him, in, like, I guess one of his first movie. I don't know if his first movie, but it was definitely in his younger days. It was cool to see him, but we didn't, and he has some funny moments, like when he's, reconnecting, like, say, with Averill after they reunite for the first time since Harvard. But he's not really given a whole lot to do, though. So you have these characters that are like, hey, I recognize so-and-so. And while a couple of them do manage to stand out, some of them just, they're kind of like glorified cameos. And at times, like, say, John Hurt's character kind of feels like that. But I will say I liked, Jeffrey Lewis's character, and his character, ironically, is one of the more minor ones, and he's like a trapper who, I don't remember what his character's name was, but, he has this, grungy, grimy look to him because he's been out in the wilderness for so long. But he has this, hilarious scene where, he's, sort of squaring off with Mickey Rourke, of all people, and I think this may have been Mickey Rourke's first movie, or at least, no, it was either his first movie or one of his first movies. But he plays a friend of Nate Champion, and Champion and Ella, and Mickey Rourke's character and the trapper are all in this house together, and just sort of having a good time and everything. And the trapper's Jeffrey Lewis's character is telling a story about how he killed a wolf with his bare hands, or how he wrestled a wolf with his bare hands. And Mickey Rourke's character is all like calling bullshit on it, right? And so the trapper, Jeffrey Lewis's character, is telling him that how he did it was he reached into the wolf's mouth, grabbed its tongue, and pulled it out to, not, he didn't rip it out, but he pulled it out of its mouth to where if the wolf tried to bite him, it would chomp its own tongue. And so Mickey Rourke's like, that's bullshit. There's no way that would work. And so Jeffrey Lewis, the trapper, and he's like, okay, stick out your tongue. And so Mickey Rourke, he sticks out his tongue, and Jeffrey Lewis just reaches over, grabs his tongue, yanks it to where Mickey Rourke's like towed along. He's all like, ah, and choking. And so Trapper's telling him, all right, try and bite me, come on, bite me. And Mickey Rourke can't, because if he does, he's going to bite his tongue in half. And so he's like, oh, I'll get him. And so see, the thing is, it's like I got so caught up in little moments like that with these quote unquote minor characters, and I would have loved to have seen more of them, because it's like, I guess maybe because Cimino had an idea that these characters, were incidental. So if they're going to be in the movie, you may as well make them memorable. And if you're going to have these good actors playing them, give them something, good to do. And so you have moments like that that work. But unfortunately, as good as those moments are, they're kind of, they're kind of the exception to things, because the majority of the movie, instead of focusing on some good stuff like that, the majority of the movie is focusing on this three-way love triangle that there's really not much in the way of chemistry of, and when you're focusing on that from the majority of a 3 hour plus movie, it really does tend to bring things down. So it's like you have this love story that's taking place in one of the most beautiful movies that I've seen, and you have these characters that show up, from time to time that do bring some life into it. So you have these moments where, the movie doesn't just look beautiful, but it starts to verge on being good, but then it goes back to the love triangle again. And also when it comes to, say, the bad guys, Sam Waterston, yeah, I mean, Jack from Law and Order, he's a bad guy. Like he's, let me see his name. Give me a sec. Yeah, Frank M. Carter. Sorry, like I said, there's a bunch of people to keep track of, but he plays this bastard named Frank M. Carter, who's basically the leader of this group of mercenaries, and he's representing the Cal Barons, right? And I remember reading in this book called Hollywood Hall of Shame, which was the first time I heard about. That's how I found out about Heaven's Gate. But one of the things they joke about in the book is that Sam Waterston, is made, to be such a despicable character that they even, put a Hitler mustache on him. And it's true, they did. So while on one hand, it is fascinating seeing, the guy from Law and Order being a bad guy here, because I mean, at times, you do hate his guts and you want him to, have something happen to him. Like you want him to get his comeuppance, right? But unfortunately though, while, he's, a downright, evil villain, he's also a bit of a mustache twirling villain. Like he doesn't literally twirl his mustache, but he's almost cartoonishly evil in terms of, say, how much he hates immigrants and everything. And one of the things though is that the movie is addressing the white on white racism, but it doesn't really go into, say, okay, why does Carter hate these immigrants so much? Like, why is he, wanting to hire these mercenaries to kill these immigrants? I feel like, the movie might have been better in the regard of, say, character development if for the other side, if maybe their concerns or their, points had been made about how the immigrants keep on stealing their cattle and what have you. I mean, it's touched on, it's talked about, but in the scenes where that happens, it's like, okay, we know that Cimino is definitely on the side of the immigrants, and I think most people would be, but at the same time though, it's like you when you have a movie that's supposed to be showing two sides, I mean, there's nothing wrong with favoring this one side over the other, but you've got to have it to where the other side has a point, or has, at the very least, a motivation that makes sense. Because if you just have them being cartoonishly evil the whole time and just paying lip service to a motivation, you have villains that, while they might be fun to watch, or at the very least someone who you want to see die, you don't really get invested in the villains, if that makes sense. I mean, you look at, say, Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber in Die Hard. I mean, you want him to die, but you love watching him. Well, with Sam Waterston here, I mean, with respect to him as an actor, because he is a good actor, um, he just, you know, you don't really enjoy watching him in this. He's just, he's like, sort of this cartoonishly evil racist, who, I mean, yeah, racism was and still is a thing, but it almost comes across like, an over the top skit at times with his character, so, and of course the Hitler mustache doesn't help either. But I think the real Carter may have had a similar type of mustache, or he did have a mustache. I remember that much at least. But yeah, so it's this weird thing where I think maybe if the movie had been shorter, I think maybe I'd be willing to say that this is a straight up good movie. But unfortunately, because it's as long as it is, and the majority of its focus is on, the protagonists that we, or at least I found myself not really caring about. I mean, like I said, at one point, um, each of the three main protagonists, has a moment to shine. Like there is something, that they do like on their own that I think works well. But when, one of them's supposed to be, with the other or something like that, that's where the chemistry is, goes downhill. And, it's like those moments where they shine were few and far between, at least in my opinion. Nothing against the actors, because the actors are good. It's just they're having to work with a screenplay that doesn't really give them, much in the way of a, believable connection or relationship. Fun physical moments aside, of course. But yeah, I think that, if the movie had been, say, like either shorter and it would have been good, or maybe if it had been a mini series instead of a movie, and maybe had, say, like, Cimino working with, another screenwriter to, work on the character development, I think that Heaven's Gate would have been good. So, but unfortunately, you have a 3 hour plus movie, that looks amazing and, has some, fantastic moments, but it's ultimately, brought down, by a group of, protagonists that we, don't really care about, but we're unfortunately, spending the most amount of time of, for the movie. So, I found myself like, alternating between being awestruck at the beauty of the movie or, being moved by, the occasional, moment of human pathos, but with, say, incidental characters, or say, laughing at the antics of in its incidental characters. But, because those were, minor moments, and those moments didn't make up the majority of the movie, well, I found myself, sort of, I'm not going to say I was bored when it came to, say, focusing on the main characters, but I just found myself sort of, going on autopilot at times. Like I was paying attention, but my mind was kind of wandering when it came to, say, whenever the movie focused on the main characters. So I will say, though, that when it gets to that climactic battle in the second half of the movie, I mean, very well done, very well staged, very violent. Yeah, you see what bullets do to people pre CGI. You see like wagon wheels, going over people's legs and things like that. And yeah, it's brutal. But just unfortunately, though, I think that because I didn't really find myself caring about the protagonist. I cared more about, say, the plight of the immigrants, than, say, the characters I was supposed to care about. I mean, as far as, say, I'm supposed to be rooting for the main characters, but it's more like, I was pulling for, the immigrants, to be able to put up a fight against, the mercenaries and what have you, the minor characters, so to speak. So it's kind of like, I guess, imagine, say, showing someone a really cool battle scene, and it is a good battle scene, but, because they don't really, know about what's going on with the main characters, it's hard for them to get invested. Well, I mean, I know what's going on with the main characters, but because there's not much, of a connection there, at least in my opinion, or at least the connection is, you know, um, conveyed in, a way that's, not very convincing. It's like I enjoyed the battle on a visual level, but I didn't find myself, say, getting emotionally caught up in it, if that makes sense. Whereas if I'd cared about the main characters, I think I would have been more, say, like on the edge of my seat or something like that, as opposed to just going like, whoa, at the spectacle of it all. So, say this is difficult because, I mean, I want to say it's a good movie, but unfortunately, that because of the main focus being on, characters that it's difficult to care about, for me at least, that's what brings the movie down. So it's still a worthwhile movie. It's definitely, in some instances, it does verge on being good, but I think at the end of the day, it's a decent movie as opposed to a good movie. So I'm going to go ahead and give Heaven's Gate 3 out of 5 stars. It comes so close to being good at times. It's just the main characters. It's like they need better development, and then you would have had a good movie. So yeah, Heaven's Gate, 3 out of 5 stars. So as far as special features go, I mean, disc 1, I mean, you basically have, a spruced up, release of the movie. Like, the sound is good, the visual quality is amazing, and there's subtitles. So one of the upsides about the sounds is that there's this ambience, like background noise, like stuff that you would probably hear in like the 1890s, like because they put so much effort into recreating, that time period, or, that, life and what have you. And you really do feel like you're dropped in the middle of all that. But at times it is hard to hear what certain people are saying. So thankfully there are subtitles with this, so they do come in handy. And as far as disc 2, you have this illustrated audio interview with Michael Cimino and producer Joanne Corelli, who I don't remember if she was like a friend of his or a girlfriend, but the two of them were close. So the two of them, talk about the movie and, their thought processes on, what goes into, making a movie and what have you. And there's some interesting stuff, there. And, Cimino, I mean, whether you like him as a person or not, or whether you, think he's a good director or not, he definitely has some interesting stuff to say about, filmmaking, and his thought processes. And so, considering Cimino's, sadly passed away a few years ago, it's, it's fascinating, listening to him. It's kind of like, when I was listening to audio commentary of Tobe Hooper on Salem Slot. I mean, you're really getting a look into the mindset of, a gifted director who, sadly is no longer with us, so it's that kind of feeling. You have an interview with actor Kristofferson, who also, died not that long ago. He's someone who enjoyed, making the movie, and he really liked his part in the movie, and he liked what the movie was trying to do, and he feels like the movie was worthwhile. He feels like that it was a good movie, and he hates how much it was trashed by the press at the time it came out. But at the same time, though, I mean, he just looks back on it, while there were some problems with it, he said that it was something that he was very proud of, and he brought a lot of his own morality into the part of his character. And there's even a nice little moment where he was remembering how he was depressed because he had broken up with his wife, I think, or girlfriend, one of the two. I think it may have been his wife, and he and his wife had divorced, and so he was devastated about that, and so his character, is supposed to be, going through the ringer emotionally speaking because of, this knowledge of, what these Calibarons are about to, do to these immigrants, and he's supposed to be protecting them, and he just feels so helpless. His character is supposed to be, feeling helpless and everything, and so Cimino, picked up on the fact that Kristofferson was, was seriously, sad and upset, and so when he found out, what was going on, when Kristofferson opened up to him and told him, it's like, hey, this, my wife and I split up and we're getting divorced and what have you. And Cimino just told him, use that, take that, bring it into your character, make it work for him. And Kristofferson, he's telling the story, he's like, and I did, and it worked. And so, and it shows a moment or two, like in the movie, like kind of to show things in context, and knowing that about what was going on with Kristofferson, in hindsight, there are moments, that work with his character like that, when you see, like, how helpless his character feels, and you see him bringing, like, real emotion into it. So, like I said, I mean, while the love triangle is something that doesn't really work, I do think that there are individual bits about the characters that work, and that's definitely one of the things that worked about Kristofferson's character as James Averill. So it was really cool, getting his take on things, and it was nice to see him on screen, because this was like in 2012, I think. Yeah, this was from 2012. This Blu-ray was. And you also have an interview with soundtrack arranger and performer David Mansfield, who is a very talented musician, and he actually has a part in the movie as a violin player and a member of this band, and he has some cool stories to tell, and he talks about how there's a scene in the movie where like the immigrants, they're having this party, and they get on roller skates, and while they're sort of roller skating and dancing, David Mansfield, his character, he's playing this violin, and he's talking about how he actually was able to get some friends of his who were also musicians, to get together and play the band, and they kind of became a band. So you found out some cool stuff like that, and you see that he really is talented as far as like he can play and act at the same time. So that was pretty cool. And then you have an interview with second assistant director Michael Stevenson. And then you have the aforementioned restoration demonstration, where you see how the movie went from grainy to pristine looking. And there's also a booklet in here, which has like, an essay, by a critic and programmer, Giola Deglano Valiant, I hope I'm saying her name right, in a 1980 interview with Cimino. And, both the essay and the interview, give a lot of insight into things as far as, like, say, what Cimino was wanting to do with the movie, and even some things that the movie was successful in as far as what it conveyed. And say, even if you don't agree with the perspective, you can at least see where they're coming from, So yeah, all in all, though, I mean, this is a wonderful release of the movie. It's like, even though I can't quite say that the movie itself is good, I mean, it's definitely a decent movie, and I mean, I wouldn't even say it's a bad movie at all. I think that it's sad that it bombed like it did, because usually you think something like that would be reserved for a movie that's truly bad. So, but it's not a bad movie. It's just, there's just that, main aspect of the movie that brings it down, you know. And I just think that if things had been different, like if, you know, the characters had been better written, I mean, we would have had a good movie. So, but unfortunately, it's just, you know, wasn't meant to be, I guess. But it's still worth a look, though. And if you're a lover of cinema, I mean, definitely check out Heaven's Gate. And I would definitely recommend, you know, checking it out on Blu-ray, because if I remember correctly, the DVD, Criterion put out the DVD as well, but it didn't have subtitles. So yeah, Blu-ray does. So get the Blu-ray. But yeah, also just, you know, if you're a fan of, you know, Kristofferson, Christopher Walken, Isabelle Huppert, Jeff Bridges, Brad Dourif, I mean, you know, it's cool, you know, or Jeffrey Lewis or Mickey Rourke, and I mean, it's cool seeing them in, you know, certain parts in the movie, you know, that kind of thing. So, but yeah, that was Heaven's Gate, 3 out of 5 stars. So, you know, this is something I've been wanting to, you know, see for some time, and I'm glad I finally did. I see what all the fuss is about, and, you know, I definitely think that it's not a bad movie. I think that, you know, there's a lot going for it. It just, you know, at the same time, you know, I can also understand why it may have, you know, not worked in the theaters, you know. But yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. And if you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. And if you got any questions, comments, please feel free to drop them line and let me know. So thank you if you made it this far. Y'all have a good night. Take care. Bye.